Battle Ready Monday. Welcome to another guide from Twisted Dice. I'm Darren. Today I'm going to be taking you through on how to paint an awesome Death Guard model for any of your Warhammer 40k armies. Or if you own a Warhammer 30k army, then this is still a pretty damn good colour for any 30k army as well. So in this video, I'm going to be showing you how I paint my Death Guard to a nice tabletop standard. Now, they're not Golden Demon winning, but these will stand out on the tabletop. These will make your army look friggin' awesome. So hopefully there's some really cool tips and some really cool techniques that I can show you on this. So this model, so for the white, it was done via an airbrush. If you don't own an airbrush, the best way of doing the white would just be getting the base color Wraithbone from Games Workshop and then just basically priming all your models in the Wraithbone and just follow the rest of the techniques and you can still get your models to a nice tabletop standard. So base coat it all Wraithbone and then just follow the rest of the guide and hopefully you're going to come away with one hell of an awesome model. Now, if you like the content we're pushing out at Twisted Dice, please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe. And if you want to find out, if you want to hear more from myself, make sure you're hitting that bell because as I said, every Monday I'm going to be doing some form of battle ready, terrain, models, bases. I'm going to have so many cool tips and tricks that we use in the studio to get some really cool armies up on that battlefield. And of course, if you're going to go to tournaments, this is the place you want to be because we also do battle reports on a Friday. But let's say no more. Let's just get straight down to the video and hopefully you come away with some really awesome tips and tricks.
So this was originally my Death Guard colour scheme. It's not bad, it looks alright, but I want to make this look better and I want to go down the pre-heresy route. So first thing I did, without stripping any of the models, I just pre-primed all my models using a airbrush primer, Israel Sand. So once the primer was dried, I used Rhinox hide to base coat all my models in this nice rich brown. For the next stage, I went in with a Xenoph highlight using Wraithbone from Citadel from Games Workshop. Now I know a lot of people don't own an airbrush, so what you could do, you could skip this stage and just go with the Wraithbone out of a can and just base coat all your models, because the next stages I'm going to do a little bit later on is still going to make this model pop and you can still do so many cool things without having an airbrush. So Wraithbone is such an awesome colour to start off with the Xenoph highlighting. When putting this through the airbrush, you need to make sure that the Wraithbone has got plenty of thinner to the actual mixture itself, otherwise you will find it will clog. So with the Wraithbone, I've pretty much covered most of the model with this, but with that brown underneath, it's really helping pop through. And for me personally, I find it makes the Wraithbone stand out a little bit more and a lot more sharper on the model. So next up, I used dead white with a drop of white ink into the mixture just to help that white stand out and pop a lot more against the Wraithbone. The areas that I'm looking upon is mainly where the light source is going to be reflecting upon the actual armour itself. So all the top of the shoulder pads, top of the head, and this is really going to help give a lot more definition to the actual model itself for when you start putting on the weathering effects. So for the next stage, anything that was going to be metal, any trims, I went over with Chaos Black from Citadel. Now the reason why we do this is when you paint anything that's going to be metallic, it really does help that metallic colour stand out. If you was just to put the metallic paints straight over on a white background, what you'll find is you'll get a lot of the bleed through coming through from the previous paint, and it was going to take you quite a lot to get it up to the colour you want to. So starting off with a black background really does help that next colour pop. So next stage was going in with Haznut Copper, and I coated all the trims using this paint. So to thin this down, I used a little bit of airbrush thinner on the palette, and I found this will help break the paint up and allows me to distribute the paint nice and easily across the actual model itself. So I then base coated all the shoulder pads in Dark Angels Green. So the next stage I used Death Guard Green and Moot Green. So I wanted to show you on the wet palette on how I operate the paint, manipulate the paint from the palette onto the model itself. So here I'm just creating myself a colour bar using the Death Guard and the Moot Green. And what I would do is I'd mix these two together, and it's kind of a little bit thicker than a glazed mixture, but not too thick that it starts taking away detail when I apply it onto the model. So this is an example that I'd already tested on. As you can see that I've really worked on the two colours together, and I pulled it up. And what I then created was a contrast glaze just to fill back into those recesses and also darken up into the corners, because sometimes you can go a little bit too far, and I'm going to show you how to correct that. So at the end of the day, it's only paint, and paint can be corrected. So for this next stage, I'm pretty much going to coat the shoulder pad back in with the Death Guard green. Because the paints are thinned down, I'm going to show you a little trick. I use a hairdryer, so I've got the hairdryer going at the moment, so it's laid down, and what I do is I raise the model up towards myself, lay a thin coat of paint onto it, and then all I would do then is just drop the model into the hot air. Because the layers are very, very thin, it helps that paint dry so quickly, and you can do a lot of base coating so quickly using that hairdryer method. One of the things you don't want to do is, while the paint's still wet, go back over. It's so tempting sometimes, but you can make so many mistakes. So up in the top left corner, I've got my wet palette up on there, so you can see what parts of that colour palette that I'm using, or what part of the colour bar that I'm using, and applying down on what part of the actual model itself. Now, it's really important that when I'm applying this paint to the shoulder pads, just before I'm applying this, as soon as I've taken the paint off the actual wet palette, I'm actually touching it on a bit of tissue first, just to take a lot of the excess paint off. What this will do, this will allow the paint to dry a lot quicker underneath the actual hairdryer, and this is really important because we want to try to get this battle ready. The last thing we want to do is take an ever in a day just to do one shoulder pad. So this process is just really handy. It doesn't matter what project or what you're trying to achieve. This is a great way to achieve this very quickly. Now, Games Workshop have stopped doing their own glazes, so this part I'm showing you how to do or make your own glaze. So using contrast paint, a drop of water and a drop of the glaze medium, you can really produce some really awesome sharp glazes. Now for me, I always add the water into this medium. If you don't, the paste is kind of too thick and it just doesn't look great on the model itself. So all of a sudden, your glaze range is unlimited. You can do so many cool things with this glaze medium. Now there are other brands out there, and you know, if you have used something else and you could recommend something, please drop some comments down below. I'd be really interested to see what other people have used. Now all of a sudden, your glaze range is just increased, and you've got so many options you can do for your glazing. So to help pull all those blends in together, I will place this glaze over pretty much everywhere that I've just painted, just to help pull that blend in. But more importantly, I will then start to build up the Dark Angels green more into the parts that I want shadowed. Because it's a nice glaze, it will give you a nice sharp and a rich colour as well. So ivory was then applied to moot green to give that final edge highlight. So this is where the magic's going to happen. Agraf's gloss post to the standard really does help this model start coming to life. Now Death Guard's meant to be dirty, it's meant to be grimy, and this is really going to help bring some character and bring this model to life. So the reason why we go with the gloss version post to the standard version, the gloss will start pulling into the recesses. You can use the non-gloss version if you're careful, but I find using the gloss, if I do make a mistake, if I'm quick enough with a damp cotton bud, I can just wipe off the excess. Now it is really important to note at this point I have already matte varnished the model just to protect anything that I've already previously done. Now to start bringing this model even more into life and adding more depth and more magic to it, I'm going to use Ron Oxide, and I'm also going to start adding some weathering powders into the Ron Oxide. Now, up to you on what weathering powders you use. At the moment I've got abundance of Games Workshop Forge World powders, but I also do have some of the Vallejo as well, so it just depends on you and what colour suits your palette, if that makes sense. So as you can see, I'm going with Age Rust. So on the palette itself, I've got the Ron Oxide, and then I've got another bit of Ron Oxide and the Age Rust, and then I've got the Age Rust on itself, but then I add a little bit of pigment binder just into the final bit, just to make sure that it sticks to the model. Last thing you want to do is start applying it and then it starts rubbing off. So next up on the palette, I'm just going to add one more pigment into this, and this is going to be a nice, real, a lot brighter rusty colour, so more of a orange, lighter orangey brown. And as you can see, I'm just using pigment binder just to water that down, just so it flows a lot easier from the brush onto the model. So where you've got all the bullet holes or the cracks around the model, all around the recesses, I applied some more of the Ron Oxide into it. But as you can see, I'm just creating some nice weathering streaks, like where the rust or the paint would have cracked, and it just run down the actual model itself. So you can see, got in with the dark Ron Oxide first, and then start putting into the lighter colours, going more into the actual centre of where that rust is. Once the weathering powders start to dry onto the model, you start to get that texture of rust, and it looks so friggin' awesome. Especially on white, it really does stand out. So I applied a lot of the weathering powders, like especially the lighter rust, around like all the rivets. So this is kind of give that impression that over time, as the water, acids and things like that hitting the model and it's corroded the metal, you've kind of got that the pooling effect of the rust around those parts, and it really does add a little bit more depth into the model. So Nurgle's Rot was then applied onto the palette itself. So I don't add any thinners onto this, I don't add any water or anything like that. I'm just pretty much using it straight from the pot itself. But it's really important when you're applying this onto your model that you have a little bit of brush control, so don't overload the brush, otherwise it will just go blobby, and that's kind of what you don't want to aim for. So as you can see here, I'm just going to start applying the Nurgle's Rot around where the grime and the chipping effects has already happened on the model. So then using this paint, I kind of wanted to represent on that change from when Death Guard went from white and then started going over to green. So for myself, I always saw Death Guard as their colours changed over a period of time as that dirt and grime started building up. So did their armour started building up with that dark green from the grime. So I wanted to represent this by just adding that Nurgle's Rot into it, because it's just that subtle colour change. You can do so many cool things with it, and going against the white, it really does pop. And plus, because you've already got the shoulder pads of green, it really does help, again, give that little bit more extra depth and colour into the model. And all of a sudden, just by adding that one colour, it's just made that model even 10 times better. So to create some more of the chipping effects and kind of like where the armour would have taken some damage, just using the Ron Oxide, I just then started to put some random chipping effects over the actual model itself. To give it a little bit more extra weathering, more chipping effects, again using the Ron Oxide, but using a bit of sponge, I just dabbed a little bit all over the actual model itself, and this again just in turn just gives it a little bit more character. This just depends on your preference on how much you want to apply onto the model itself. When doing this, I kind of made a mistake and I kind of went a little bit too much on the shoulder pad. But at the end of the day, it's just weathering. They're Death Guard, and you can kind of pull this off with Death Guard as well. So anything that I wanted to have as a metal effect, I used a steel colour from Vallejo, and this is the metal range. Now, this paint's more designed for the airbrush, but it just works just as well on a paintbrush as well. And you can see, it just flows so easily from the brush onto the actual model. So this is going to be the recipe I'm going to be using for all the leather parts. So going with Rhine Oxide, Scrag Brown, and also Ivory from Vallejo. So first up, I just base coated all the leathery parts in the nice rich brown, which is the Rhine Oxide. So once the base coat had dried, I then started adding Scrag Brown into the actual mix itself. So as you can see on the wet palette, I've got the first part, the dark one, is a 50-50 of Scrag Brown with the Rhine Oxide, and as you can see, more towards the top, it's more going more to the brighter colour. So just like how we've done the shoulder pads, again the paints are thinned down, and just slowly applying those layers on, using the hairdryer just to speed things up. So normally when people do edge highlighting on black, they tend to go down the Fenrisian Grey and the Fang. So for this, I wanted to do something a little bit different. So using Nurgling Green, I wanted to go from black up to Nurgling Green instead, so still keeping into that green type of feel, because everything else is green, and I really wanted to stick to that if I possibly could. So Nuln Oil was then used on the model, so all the metal parts, putting the Nuln Oil on helps then, once it dries, it dulls down the metal, so it kind of doesn't have that shiny effect anymore. So to create that corrosion effect around the metal parts of the weapon itself, with some Agraff Earth and some weathering powders mixed together, I just applied it around all the metal parts on the model. To seal the final coat in, I just used a matte varnish just to make sure that none of the powders come away, and it also helps put all those transitions in, and it just makes the model pop. Thank you very much for watching Battle Ready Monday. If you like this, you enjoy this, you want to find out more, or you want to get more tips and tricks, make sure you're hitting that like and subscribe, but more importantly, hit the bell, because that's going to keep you updated on all the cool content that we've got coming out of Twisted Dice. Thanks again. Hopefully I'll catch you all very soon.